This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So yesterday we were pretty much discussing about what is an availability set, and then how do you create virtual machines within an availability set. So we were looking at firstly how do I create the availability set, and as a part of the availability set, we said what is a fault domain, what is an update domain, and then how do we create the same thing, and how do we, let's say, go ahead and deploy our machines into those fault domains and update domains. And we have a couple of machines today. So if you just look at the resources that I have, I have an availability set sample one, inside which I have two different virtual machines, which is called demo VM0, which is running as a part of the availability set within fault domain 0 and update domain 0. Then I have virtual machine 1, which is, let's say, fault domain 1 and update domain 1 out here as such. And these are the machines basically that are running, and each and every machine has its own public IP address. So if I wait for this particular machine to load, let's wait for this one to load. It'll take like a minute to go ahead and expose the public IP out here. So two different machines and two different public IP addresses that are assigned to these machines out here. So if I just go ahead and, let's say, take my public IP address out here, sorry. So machine one has its own public IP address attached. Machine two has its own public IP attached out here as such. Both are running as a part of the same virtual network, same subnet, and as a part of the same availability set. So if you see machine 00 has a public IP address called 20.246.63.182, and then I have something like demo VM1 which has, let's say, a different public IP address altogether, which will have a different public IP address altogether, of course, which will be something different out here as such. So we'll look at that once the IP loads. So is anyone any questions till here? Any questions till the setup of these, let's say, infrastructure that we have done so far? Any questions so far that I can take? Okay, so let's see. Now this machine has a different public IP if you see. So machine 1 and machine 2 have a different public IP addresses out here as such. Now what I want to do today is that I want to create a simple HTML page. Let's call it as default.html. I want to treat this as my code. I'll have the same HTML page called default.html in machine 1 and machine 2. Like I am having IRCTC application here, IRCTC application here as well, on two or three different machines running at the same time out here as such. Now, in order to configure these machines, now this is a server. It's a Windows server right now. In order to configure these machines as an application server, what I have to do is that I have to log into this particular machine and install something called as web server role, or we can also call this as IIS. This is what we need to do. So what I'll do, yes, it's Internet Information Services. So what I'll do is that firstly I'll go into my machine one. So I'll just come here and go into machine 00, grab the public IP address of this particular machine, and then log inside this particular machine and go to server manager, roles and features. I'll say add a role. I'll say add a role called web server IIS role, and then install the same thing out here as such. So let's wait for this particular public IP to come in. Sometimes it might take more than expected to give you the public IP of this particular machine. So it's updating the networking and all that stuff. So let's wait for this one. Alternatively, I can directly go to the public IP address of this particular machine to grab the same thing. So this is the IP that is attached to that particular machine. So I can just take the IP from this one instead of waiting there. And I'll just look for a remote desktop. I'll just take this out and I'll just paste the IP address that I have. I'll say more options. I'll say the user ID of that particular machine called as user, and I'll say connect. So say connect, it's asking for the password. I'll give the password to my machine 1, which is this one. I'll say yes. And once I am into the RDP session, so this is the first time that I'm on the RDP session right now. So it'll take like a minute to load this particular screen. And once I'm inside the RDP, it will go ahead and load something called as a server manager dashboard. So it's going to tell, okay, fine, welcome to the server manager. Go ahead, install, let's say, things into your machine and so on and so forth. So let's wait for a minute for the server manager to load. So yes, and once it loads, this is the first screen of your machine. It's telling, okay, fine, server manager is now loading. And if you see on the top, it's telling, okay, fine, I'm still loading and so on and so forth. After it loads, I'll just click on add roles and features. Once it says, okay, fine, before you begin, please read this out. I'm good with this. I'll say next. I'll say role based or feature based installation. I'll say next again. And I'll say demo VM00. I'll say next. And I'll just scroll down. And I don't need to do anything out here. I'll say next here. Okay, let's see. Sorry, I need to select something called web server IIS. This is something that I need to. I'll say add. I'll say next. I'll say next. 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 And finally install this out. So I'm installing a feature, or I'm installing something called as a web server IIS feature into this particular machine. And and as and when I install this feature into this machine, right, I am going to get a folder in my C drive called inetpub, and inside that particular inetpub I have a folder called www root, inside which I have some default pages called iis.html and so on and so forth. This is just telling me that the server is converted into a web application server, so that you can go ahead into the internet, you can browse for sorry, you can browse for this particular IP, and you can get whatever content that you request on, let's say, the browser out here as such. That's what it's telling me. That's the indication that it's telling me right now. Once this is done, I'll have to do the same installation on machine 2. So on demo VM 1 also, I have to go here, get the public IP, do the RDP session, install the web server IIS, and make this machine ready. Now my plan here is this. On machine 1 we are doing manually to understand how this is done. On machine 2, we'll try to approach this via a PowerShell script. So we'll go via PowerShell script. We'll see what you can do using a PowerShell script out here. So it's a simple three-liner script. We'll see what a PowerShell script does here, and so on and so forth. But manually, this is what I'm doing. Manually, I'm just going ahead, doing the RDP into the machine so that I can go into the machine, establish a session, and I'm installing a feature called Web Server IIS. This is the first thing that I'm doing out here. After that, I'm now telling that I'll go into that particular folder called www root. Once inside that particular folder, I'll add a file called default.html and add some content inside it. I'll put some content inside. This is what I'm doing. I'm doing this manually and I want to automate this out. I want to, let's say, automate this or not. So let me wait for a minute. So installation is succeeded. I'll say close. Once that's done, I'll go inside my folders into this PC, into the C drive of this particular PC. I'll say internet inetpub. I'll say www root. And in here, what I want to do is that now I want to, let's say, go ahead and add a file here. I'll just open up the notepad, and here what I'll do is I'll simply go ahead give some HTML content. So I'll say h1. I'll say this is server 1 from ECUS, something like this. Or I can say this is, sorry, I'll just close the HTML properly, and I'll say I'll just give the computer name out here, telling it is demo VM 00. So I'll say this is demo VM 00 from ECUS, and I'll say save. I'll save this in the same folder, where I have all my root folders out here. So it's having all the root files and all that stuff. I'll say all files and I'll save this as a HTML file. So I'll give a quote here. I'll say default.html. Close the quotes. I'll say save this out. So now I have a file, or now I have a page called default.html. So what I'll do is, like, if I go here into that particular demo VM00, if I copy the IP address, go to my browser, paste this here, I will have this particular internet information services coming up, but I also have the default.html page, right? So what I'll do is I'll put a forward slash and I'll say, please load this file called default.html. So if I load this file, putting a forward slash, it'll just go into that particular file, get the content of this particular file, tell that this is default or this is demo VM00 from East US out here such. So this is what I have done manually. Firstly, I've installed that particular feature called IIS, then added a file called default.html into that particular folder. If I want to, sorry, if I want to automate this out, firstly, I have to figure out a way in order to install the IIS using PowerShell. Then I'll have to figure out a way in order to, let's say, go ahead, add this file into that particular folder. These are two things that I need to do. Now, if you go into the documentation, just say in Google, say install IIS via PowerShell. It's a simple one-liner command. Just telling install Windows feature, name web server. That's what it did, right? We said it's a Windows feature. Name with the let's say something called web server out here. Now, if you run this command on your local machine, it won't work. It's only for a Windows server. So your machine is a laptop. It's a Windows Home operating system. It will not work in your laptop. So what I want to do is that I want to copy this particular command. I want to run it on top of the server. So I want to go into the server and I want to run it on top of the server called demo VM01. But I don't want to do the RDP, because if I do the RDP, it'll take some time to go ahead and do the RDP and so on and so forth. So what this does is that when you create a Windows virtual machine and just type in run here, you have something called run command. Meaning without logging into the machine, you can run commands on the machine using this particular portal. And it's saying, okay, fine, run some PowerShell commands. I'll click on, I'll click on this and I'll paste the command that I had. I'll copy the command from this particular documentation telling install hyphen Windows features, the name web server. Again, how did I come to this? I just type in Google telling install IIS via PowerShell. Just type this in. This will be the first documentation that will give you. Just scroll down to the documentation and this is going to tell you how do you install, and this is the welcome page that you see. So we'll just install, we'll just copy this out, go to the run command out here, paste it here and say run. That's it. This is what I'm doing in order to just go ahead and install that particular IIS, that particular service called IIS out here as such. After this, uh, now once you install the IIS, right, we'll just go ahead and verify whether IIS is there or not. After that, I just want to put a default.html page inside it, for which you again have a very simple command called set hyphen content. So there is something called get content. When you say get content, you'll get a content inside a file. When you say set content, it'll go ahead and set some content inside a file out here as such. That's what I want to do. And I'll just load, I'll just take that command out from my machine. I have something here. Let's see. Let me see my partial scripts. So this is the end-to-end command that I had. I just went ahead, install this particular Windows feature, and then I have something called set content. And I'm saying the path here is what? inet pub www root, then default.html. I'm telling, okay, fine. If there is no file called default.html, please give me a file called default.html. Then I'm saying this is server and there is a variable called environment.computer name. So if I take this variable, right, this is a system defined variable. It's telling, okay, fine, please go to the environment, get a variable called computer name. So if I even run this on my PowerShell, called environment.computer name and say enter, it's just going to give me my PC name. So whatever is your computer name, it's going to give in the virtual machine. This value will be returned as demo VM00 or demo VM01. So I'll say computer name and I'll say from East US 2, something like this for my understanding. I'll take this command also, sync set content, copy this command. I'll copy this command out. So now if you see, firstly, that command is successful, telling that Windows features are installed and etc. So if I just take the IP address of my machine, which is demo VM1, and firstly look if check if let's say that particular IIS is installed or not. Server demo VM01. Firstly, let's go into the public IP address directly so that I can grab the address of the same thing. So this is 01. This is the IP address of that particular 01. So if I copy this, go to the browser, paste this here. This is giving me the IIS page, which means IIS is installed, but I did not even log into the machine. So I can avoid the time of logging into the machine, going ahead, manually installing this out, and so on and so forth. And after that's done, I now have the second command, which is that set hyphen content. I'm saying set content path is default.html. Please go ahead and give this. I'll say run. This shouldn't take a lot of time. This should just go ahead and give it in a minute. So it's just going ahead into the particular path. Sorry, it's just going ahead into that particular path, uh, setting some content out here called default.html and giving me a file. So it's just going ahead updating the file out here as such. That's what this particular command is trying to do. And once this command is run successfully, let's also go ahead and try to hit /default.html to see whether you have a HTML page or not. So let's do that. Server demo VM01. Since it's not properly formatted, you don't have a bold. Saying this is server demo VM01 from East US to out here. Same thing, it's telling this is server demo VM00 from East US to. This is in, let's say, in a heading. This is not in heading, so it's just the HTML, the way the HTML is working out here as such. So without even logging into the second virtual machine, I was able to achieve all these things. So it's saying script execution is complete. So it's done. So I'm good with this. Which means without even having to log into that particular machine, I'm able to, let's say, use that particular run command out there. And I'm going ahead and I'm trying to run all my PowerShell scripts out here as such. So that provides you a very good way in order to take all your PowerShell, run on top of a machine without even having to, let's say, look into what is there in that particular machine out here as such. Yes, any questions still here?
Generally,
Anyone, any
what is
questions?
the recommended way, Kiran? I mean, is it we will install
Mm-hmm,
the install commands, we'll bake it into like a bootstrap to the virtual machine,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
or we will bake it into the image of the virtual machine.
See, the better way to do is that image also works. Doing the virtual machine into an image, even that works. But the limitation, if you create a virtual machine into an image, is that not all the softwares get installed. Because see, when you talk about a virtual machine, I have a lot of softwares which requires licensing. I have a lot of softwares which, let's say, requires custom installation out here and so on and so forth.
Right, right. Now, in this case,
So,
I mean, IIS is a default service, right? So you can.
so IIS is a default service. This can be converted into an image. Now, this can be easily put as an image, and you can just create a new virtual machine out of that particular image out there.
So, or
That is
can we
possible.
add it to
Go.
the bootstrap whenever the machine is up and running, right? Starts up and running.
Mhm.
The bootstrap script will execute it and install IIS.
Instead of that, you have something called as a custom script extension here. Let's look
So
at
we
that
don't have
extension.
bootstrapping here actually.
You don't really have that. I'm not really too sure about the bootstrapping out here in a virtual machine, but you have something called extensions. What
Okay.
you can do is that you can say add an extension, and this is going to tell, okay, fine, what kind of an extension do you want? You can go ahead and install an antivirus into it, or you can go ahead do some custom script extensions. For example, there's something called custom script extension out here. So if we click here, and say next. It's going to tell, okay, fine, I understand you want to execute a script. Either it be a batch command, or it can be a CMD command, or it can be a file. But one thing here that you require is a storage account. So if you say browse, it's going to tell, okay, fine, in which storage account your script is. Once you select your storage account, and once sorry, once you say that, okay, fine, my storage account is in place, you can simply go ahead execute your scripts whenever your machine is started. So whenever your machine
At
is
the time
started,
of starting, right? I mean, or before the starting or after starting.
it what happens right now is that since the machine is already started, once you put the script in, it will go ahead and let's say execute for the first time. Whenever you restart, the script is again going to get executed, check whether all the, let's say, settings are there in place or not.
No, if it is a new machine, let's say, we can add
If
this
it's
one.
a new machine, at the time of startup, these scripts are executed. So these are all startup scripts.
Oh, okay, right. Okay.
So you can
But
go ahead
this
use this.
requires a storage account to store the script, right?
This requires a storage account to store the script, or I mean, I'm also going to do a demo on custom script extension again. So,
Okay.
or you can go ahead store your script into a GitHub repository or
Okay.
an Azure DevOps repository.
Right.
Call your scripts directly from that repository and then go ahead. Let's execute this out.
At the time of before starting the, I mean, or before, I mean, at the time of
Right,
VM starting.
right at the time of deployment, like
Yeah.
right at the time when you're creating your machine, the script also gets created and kind of gets executed on top of the machine out here as such. So this is a recommended way to whenever you are doing a Windows virtual machine or even a Linux virtual machine, it's a recommended way to go ahead and let's say execute sorry, execute your scripts out here as such.
So startup scripts that you are going to demonstrate
Mhm.
later, right? When you come to
Yes, I
extend.
will. Any which ways we have. I mean, once I do the ARM templates and once we go into the virtual machine, this is any which way is going to be a part of it. So I'll I'll cover what is a custom script extension. How do we do it manually, and then how do we let's say automate the same thing out here as such. Yes. Any more questions, guys? Anyone? Any more questions here? Okay. So let's see. So I have two
Kiran,
simple machines. Hmm? Good, please.
sorry, sorry for the
Good.
interruption. So you went and I know you copied some Google and IAS installation, and you copied
Hmm.
here. So
Hmm.
in real time also, do we get same kind of requirement if we want to install the same thing we have to follow, or how it will be?
See, in real time, probably the amount of installations that you need to do are more. Probably, let's say the client is going to ask you that, you know what, I need a machine with Google Chrome browser installed in it, with Visual Studios installed in it, with .NET workloads installed in it, or Java installed in it, and so on and so forth. So yes, you can write a PowerShell script for all those things. Place your PowerShell scripts in a storage account, call a custom script extension, or if you just want to perform this on one simple machine, just have one machine out here. You just want to let's say go ahead and do it for one time activity. Let's say it's a one time activity, then you can go ahead use that particular run command here. In my case, the IIS installation that I did is a one time activity out here. So I just went ahead, said okay, fine, I want to run a PowerShell script, pasted my scripts, ran it out, and got my job done. So it depends upon whether it's a one time activity or whether you would update your scripts on a regular basis. Let's say probably the first requirement was that, you know what, install IIS. Then the client is later coming and telling, okay, fine, you know what, I also want to install Google Chrome on top of it. So the best way to do all these things is that store your script in a storage account, keep your scripts updating at a regular point in time, and your let's say you can use the extensions window here, and this extension will anyway just read from that particular storage account on a regular basis. So whenever you go ahead and let's say restart your machines, or whenever you go ahead and let's say want to perform something, you can go ahead and manually hit the run extension, or when you restart your machine, the extension is anyway just going to run. So it depends upon what exactly we want to achieve. In my case, the simplest way, I just wanted an IIS for one time installation, so that's the reason we are using a run command out here as such.
Okay, Kiran. So how will it validate the license, Kiran? Like while downloading and installing? Normally,
uh,
some software center in real time, we in our network we have some software center where we can have everything license, etc. softwares
Right.
over there. So we will
Right.
download it, we will install it, and we will use
Hmm.
it.
Correct.
Similar with the cloud, do we have a kind of software where like organization maintains in the virtual network to download it from there? Licensing, how we are handling here?
Yes, I mean, see, there is a service inside. So the question what Ramakrishna is asking is that, let's say the software has licenses. So where do we store licenses? So there is a service inside Azure called as an Azure Key Vault, something called Azure Key Vault, wherein you can store all your secrets. You can treat your licensing as a secret, and what you can do is that you can configure your PowerShell script to go ahead inside your Key Vault, download that particular secret when you're installing the software. So you can download that particular secret out here. So again, we do have demonstrations for all these things out. So that's the reason I'm not really going into it right now. So I'm establishing the basics at this point so that everyone is on the same page, and then I can go ahead and demonstrate those things out here as such.
Sorry, Kiran. Okay, I just wanted.
Yes, any more questions, guys? All right, so if you look at this, this is a setup that I have. Now I have very simple workloads, a simple default.html page that is running on both the machines. Now I am assuming that both the pages are quite similar to each other. Meaning I'm telling, okay, fine, I have two machines. I have deployed the same code on both the machines. Literally the same code on both the machines out here. But in order to differentiate between machine 1 and machine 2, I am telling in this page that this is demo VM00. I'm telling in this page that this is demo VM01. This is what I'm doing. That's it. In order to differentiate the code, in order to differentiate for my understanding or for my demonstration out here as such. Now, there is one issue. As an end user, right? So I'm your client. I say that, okay, fine, you know what? I want to use your application. Your application is now running inside your virtual machine. So now you either have an option to give me the public IP address 1 or the public IP address 2. Both the IP addresses have the same content. So either if I go here, interact with this machine, I'll reach to this particular page and I'll be able to see the application. Let's say this is IRCTC. So I can go ahead and let's say book my tickets and whatever it is. Same code is also running here. So if I go here into demo VM1, I have a default HTML application here also. I can also go ahead and use the literally the same application here also. So either which ways my application is working. But the issue is that let's say that you have given the public IP 1 to this particular user. So to this end user, you have given something called as a public IP 1 out here. Now, if this user is using this public IP 1, this is the address he will be using, which is 22.42.63.182. So this is the address he is using. So I as a user, I'll be able to let's say visit this website, but in case something happens to this particular machine is not available due to a fault failure or due to some kind of an update that Microsoft was doing in the backend. Now in that point, I cannot ask my users that, hey, you know what, this IP is not working. Now start using this IP. I cannot do that because see, I've already given this particular address to let's say millions and millions of people. I cannot now go ahead and say, you know what, everyone, please don't use this IP. It's not no longer valid. Please go ahead use this particular IP address. I cannot do that. Also, what I want to do is that I don't want these machines to be idle. I don't want these machines to be idle. I want to utilize both the machines, which means that if I have multiple users here, which means that the incoming traffic is more, the amount of traffic is more, which means that probably I want the first request to go into machine 1. I want the second request to go into, let's say, machine 2. Third request to go into machine 1. Fourth, so on and so forth. So I want to distribute my load equally. So I want to balance my load equally. In order to achieve all these things, we now have a device in Azure called as a load balancer. Called as a load balancer out here. Again, there are different types in load balancer, like public load balancer and internal load balancer out here as such. And in today's session, I'm trying to, let's say, look at something called as a public load balancer in Azure. What exactly this does? Very simple. A load balancer is a very simple device out here. It'll just go ahead. It'll attach itself to these machines. Let's say, okay, fine. I'm reading these machines. I'm reading the data that's there in these machines, and this load balancer is going to have its own public IP address. It's going to have its own public IP address out here. Now, for you as a user, I'm going to give this IP address. I'm going to give this address or the domain name that is attached to this particular address. Anything's okay. And you as a user will simply go ahead, talk to this particular IP, and this IP will communicate your request to the load balancer. The load balancer will say, okay, fine, let me see which machine is available. In the background, let me see which machine is really working, and I'll divert your traffic to that particular machine. If both the machines are working, I'll alternatively divert your traffic to machine 1 or machine 2 and so on and so forth out here as such. That is what is the duty or the work of a load balancer. Just to understand how your machines are functioning, like are your machines really functioning out here? And if it is functioning, let me go ahead and divert your traffic to those machines out here as such. That's what a load balancer does. Now, in order to create this out, let me go back into my Azure portal and let me search for load balancers. Something called load balancer out here. I'll go there. I will say create. As of now, I don't have a load balancer. I'll say create a load balancer. I can create it in any resource group. Let's say something like I'll say demo RG load balancer. In a different resource group than my virtual machines. Yes, it is possible to have load balancer in a different resource group than my virtual machine is. I'll say okay. I'll say this is a demo load balancer USEs 2, and very importantly, my load balancers and the machines that the load balancer is, let's say, diverting the traffic to, have to be in the same region. They have to be in literally the same region out here. I'll say okay, great. And since my machines are running as a part of ECS2, I'll create my load balancer in ECS2 only. And now you have three different SKUs of the load balancer out here. One being standard, most use case scenario. This is most widely used. Then you have basic. So this is what Microsoft is now telling you is that, you know what, Microsoft recommends going for a load balancer with the standard SKU out here. You'll have to always try going for standard load balancer, and there is a price difference between standard load balancer and a basic load balancer, and also there is the availability difference. Meaning standard load balancers come with something called zone redundancy. Meaning if it fails in one zone, it'll Microsoft will take care of diverting the load balancer into a different zone. So it has zone redundancy out here. And there is something called gateway. We'll talk about what a gateway really is when you come down to, let's say, concepts like VPNs and all that stuff. But what I'll
So
do today,
when you say zone, it is availability zone you are referring to, Karan.
I'm sorry, can you come again, please?
When you are saying zone
Hmm.
redundancy, is it availability zone?
It's an availability zone, yes.
Oh, okay.
Which means that when you go for a standard, you have multiple instances of your load balancer deployed across zones. It's like a ZRS that you get. So in case, let's say, the load balancer doesn't really respond in zone 1, the traffic is automatically diverted to let's say the zone 2 or the zone 3 instance, which is really active. That's what standard gives you. And reason being, standard load balancers are costly. They are costlier than, let's say, your basic load balancers. Now, however, if you're just testing this out, in my case, I'm just testing this out. So what I'll do, I'll also explain the difference between what a standard and a basic load balancer is. So let's open the documentation and keep it ready. I'll just go for basic right now. I'll just say basic, and I'll say the load balancer type is a public load balancer. There are two different types of load balancers that are on the offer. One is public, the other is internal. Public load balancers are used for the scenarios when you want to expose your applications to the internet. Meaning, right now, it's a web server. I have a web server workload out here, and I want to expose this application over to the internet out here. I want to expose this out over to the internet. Internal load balancing comes into picture, and probably you have multiple databases. You want to divert the database, let's say you want to divert the traffic to that particular database, but you don't want to expose those databases out there to the internet. That's where internal comes into picture. Internal load balancers comes into picture. So what I'll do right now is, since I have a public based or a public facing application, I'll say this is public, and then I have a tier called regional or global. Global doesn't apply for a standard, sorry, a basic load balancer. But if you go for a standard, you can also go ahead and configure something called as a global load balancing mechanism. Let's look at what is a basic, then come down there. I'll say regional. I'll say next. Now they're asking me, okay, since it's a public facing load balancer, this load balancer needs to have a public IP address. Now give us the public IP address. I'll say okay, fine, add a public IP, and I'll say the name of the IP is load balancer IP. And for us, let's say a basic load balancer, I can only go for an IPv4 address. And then it's telling choose a public IP. I'll say I don't have one. I'll create one. So I'll say this is test IP. And here you have an option to go for either dynamic or static IP addresses out here. So you can either go for dynamic or static. I'll say dynamic. I'll say okay. I'll say add. I'll say next. Here they're going to ask you what is the backend pool, meaning can you tell me what are all the machines that are running in the background that I need to handle. I, as in the load balancer, needs to handle, the load balancer needs to divert the traffic to. And for a basic load balancer, this is the biggest difference between a basic and a standard. If you are configuring a basic load balancer, all the machines that you want to add into your backend pool needs to belong to the same availability set, which means using a basic load balancer, you can only divert traffic to machines belonging to the same availability set, which means if the entire data center is down, your basic load balancer has no meaning, let's say, in place. That's the reason it doesn't have a very good SLA. Whereas a standard load balancer, for a standard load balancer to work, you don't need your machines to be a part of the same availability set. Meaning the machines can be a part of the availability zone as well, but should have to be, or your machines and the load balancer, they have to be in the same region. It has to
So
be in the
here,
same region. Mhm.
here tier global is across the regions, load balancing across the regions or across
Tier
development.
global, yes, is it's across a region. It's I mean, the name global itself indicates that it's across region.
So in
Whereas
that case,
mhm, mhm,
standard load balancer, whatever we are discussing now, it
okay,
has to be in the same region, right? It cannot be, I mean, it can be across the regions. It
standard
can
load balancer
load
cannot be
balance.
across the regions. Yes,
No,
yes.
can be right in that case if it is global.
If it is standard regional load balancer, see, we
It
are
is
talking
within
about
region,
standard regional, right? If it's standard regional, the load balancer and the virtual machines have to be a part of the same region.
same region. Yeah, that I
If
understood.
it's
Yeah.
a
If it is
standard
global,
global,
yeah,
right? So if it's a global, the point here is that I'll explain, the difference between a global and a standard. But just to give you an idea, if you are creating a global load balancer, you cannot add virtual machines directly to it. In my case, when I'm doing a standard regional, I'm saying I can add virtual machines running as a part of the same availability set to it or availability zone to it and so on and so forth. But if you're doing a standard global, you can only add load balancers, which are regional load balancers in nature, as a backend pool.
got it,
You
got it.
cannot directly add your virtual machines out here as such.
So it load
We'll
balance
talk
between
about
the
that.
load balancers. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it load balance between the load balancers. So we'll talk about that infrastructure as well. Let's go with this and let's say add a backend pool. I'll say add a backend pool. I'll say here I'll just give a pool name called pool A, some random name. I'll say pool A. It's asking me which virtual network your pool is a part of. I'll tell you know what, there's only one virtual network right now. I'm selecting this particular virtual network and I'll say add, and let's see. So let's see in the same location. Yes, the resources are a part of the same location. Let's go here. IP configurations. Let's see. Okay, IP configurations. The virtual machine must be in the same load balance in the same virtual network. Yes, they are. Let's do an add. Okay, let's do an add here, and let's filter this out. So this is ECS2, and this is the same IP address that I do have. So IP configuration must be in the same location as this one. Yes, it's in the same location. Let me give it one simple shot. So it's ECS2. There's also ECS2 if I'm not wrong. Oh, shit, sorry. Let me create this out once again. Let me say this is global load balancer. Sorry, demo load balancer, demo RG load balancer. And let's say add this out. This is demo load balancer out here. The region to be ECS2 only, as same as the network and same as the machines. I'll say basic, I'll say public, regional, I'll say next IP address configuration. I'll just configure this out. IP, continue, I'll say this is just IP load balancer. Say dynamic static, anything's okay. Let's add this out once again. Let's see if I can get it. Let's say pool A. I'll just select my virtual network out here. Let's see if I'm able to get something. Okay, I'm not able to get something. I'm not really sure. This is a little odd. Let's see. Once again, let's say create balance. Let's say I can pool. I'll say pool A. The IP configuration of virtual machines must be in the same location. Yes, it's in the same location, but I'm not too sure on why this isn't, let's say, giving me any virtual machines that are running in the part of the backend pool. So let's see. Let's see what are the IP addresses that is
Are they in
associated
the
with this.
same availability set? I think they are in the same availability set.
It is a part of the same availability set, but the issue here is that the public IP addresses that are associated with my virtual machines are static in nature. So if I look at the public IP addresses that are associated with my virtual machine out here, they have a static configuration.
Okay.
So even my load balancer has to have a static configuration out here.
Oh, did you
So
select
the
it
IP,
static when creating a virtual machine?
yes, while creating the virtual machines, we went with the static out here.
Okay.
So which means that even if I go into the load balancer and look at my IP address, even this has to be, let's say, static.
The public IP
Save.
address that doesn't. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah. Let's try this out once again and let's see if it is able to identify my pools. Okay, still nothing. Okay, this is a little strange. Okay, fine. Let's see. This is IP addresses which are same availability set. It's all good.
Can you check the IP addresses of both VMs?
Sorry, IP addresses of both the VMs. This one.
Yeah. No, no. Private IP addresses.
Private IPs are the same. Like I mean, they have two different private IPs out there. But I'll have to figure out why this isn't, let's say, adding. So it's 004
Okay,
and this
that is
is
one.
005. Mhm. Okay, so let me do one thing. Let me quickly change this load balancer SKU to, let's say,
Standard.
standard. Let's try standard out because basic for some reason is not really taking this out. I'll have to check why this isn't. Demo, I'll say load balancer. I have to check why the basic isn't working. Let's put a standard, let's say public, and let's say next configuration. Okay, fine. I'll say this is our demo LP USS2. So the region is East US2. So IP configuration, this should be static. Test IP LB. So this is a load balancer IP. And the zone redundant, I'm okay with that. I'll say this is pool A, and this is the virtual network out here. Say NIC cards, and yes, I'm able to, let's say, look at the virtual machines out here. So I'll have to figure out why it isn't, let's say, taking a basic load balancer as such. I'll have to understand why this is, let's say, behaving in that way. But as of now, I'm going with the standard load balancer, and I'm adding the NIC cards of my virtual machines as the backend pool. So I'm telling, okay, fine, these virtual machines, each and every them, if each and every of them have a NIC card, NIC card out here, I'm adding them as the backend pool. And very importantly, I'll say just save this out. I'll say next. And now it's asking me, you know what? How exactly I need to divert the traffic? So basic wasn't working. I switched it to standard. I'll have to just check the documentation for basic and see why isn't it working out here. I'll come back to that. Now it's telling, okay, fine, you have a standard. Now tell me, how do I divert the traffic to the backend pool? Meaning, this public IP right now behaves as a listener, meaning it's listening to your clients, it's understanding how, let's say, the traffic is coming in, and I'm now telling that, okay, fine, if any traffic is coming on the internet, which is a port called HTTP, which works on a port number called 80, I'm telling, okay, fine, if any traffic comes on 80 on this particular public IP, divert them to the backend pool at a port called 80, because even these machines are listening, let's say, at port 80 out here. So in order to configure that rule, I'll say yes, add a load balancing rule out here, and I'll say this is rule A, something like this. I'll say rule A. Just scroll down, and it's telling what is the front end IP address of your load balancer. I'll say this is the IP. It says, okay, fine, it's to be created. It's telling what is the backend pool. So front end and backend. So I'll say pool A, which contains two machines out here. And now it's asking what is the protocol. I'll just say, you know what, just take a TCP protocol out here. And now it's asking what is the port number that I need to listen on the front end. I'll say, okay, fine, you know what, it's port 80. So please listen to traffic at port 80. If you have configured, let's say, something like SSL, HTTPS, and etc., you can do a 443. Then scrolling down, it's telling, okay, fine, what is your backend pool or backend port? I'll say it's 80 as well. So whenever you get a traffic at, let's say, the front end port called 80, divert it to the backend port called 80 is what I'm telling in the form of a rule. Then, very importantly, I have something called as a health probe. It's telling, you know what? In order for me to understand which machine to divert the traffic to, I need to understand the health status of each and every machine. Meaning whether the machine is really up and running or whether the machine has any issues or something like that. For which there is someone called as a health probe between the virtual machine and the load balancer. So between the virtual machine and the load balancer, there is something called as a health probe, which for which for every 5-second interval will go into the backend pool and understand whether the machines are healthy or not. So what the load balancer will do is that load balancer will send some artificial traffic to these particular machines. See whether the machines are responding or not. That's what it'll do. So I'll just go ahead and I'll say, okay, fine, you know what? I'll just configure a health probe. I'll say create new. And it's just asking me what is the name of the health probe. I'll say it is a sample health probe. I'll say the protocol is HTTP protocol, meaning go to the HTTP traffic, go to this particular port. And for every 5-second interval, you can change this time. I'll say 2 seconds or 3 seconds or 4 seconds, something like that. Fine. So it starts starting from 5 seconds. Okay, fine. So let's see. So starting from 5 going to this one. So minimum value is 5. It should be inclusive. So I'll tell, okay, fine, 5 seconds. For every 5 seconds, go to the backend, see whether that particular, let's say, pool or whether that particular machines are alive or not, and report back to me. Back to me as in the load balancer out here. If you feel that the machines are down, just don't divert the traffic to them out here as such. This is how load balancer is going to understand whether the machine is alive or not. whether the machine is really alive or not out here as such. Now what I'll do is I'll say I'd added the health probe. I don't need an outbound rule at this point. I'll say tags optional, review and create this out. So what I'm doing is I'm now going ahead and I'm now creating a load balancer with two different machines. So it's a standard load balancer with two different machines that are running in the background. And I have multiple things out here. Now, these are the components of a load balancer. Very importantly, in the very first page, we said what is the type of a load balancer. So I'll just write down what all did we, let's say, doing the load balancer out here. In the very first page, I said the type. The type is a public and it's a regional load balancer out here with an SKU called standard. This is what we deployed today. And then in the second page, configured the sorry, the front end IP address of the load balancer. Front end IP address that is attached to this particular load balancer out here. Then I had something called inbound rules, wherein I'm telling, okay, if the traffic comes at 80, where should you divert the traffic to? You know what backend pool you need to divert the traffic to out here. And then within the inbound rules, I had something called as a health probe, when I'm telling for every 5-second interval or every 10-second interval or every 15-second interval, so on and so forth, go to the background, check whether your machines are healthy or not, and report back to me or divert the traffic accordingly and so on and so forth. This is going to go ahead, create an entire component called load balancer out here for me. Now, this particular load balancer got created, standard SKU out here. It also has something called as a front-end IP sorry, it has a front-end IP configuration with this particular IP address, which is 20.62.51.6, which is different from both the machines. So first machine has an IP ending with 182. Second machine has an IP ending with 6. Load balancer has got an IP which is very different from both the machines out here. Then you have backend pools, and in the backend pool you have, let's say, pool A and pool, sorry, in let's say you have pool A, which is demo VM00 and demo VM01. Both are running. So it's saying both are running out here. Then you have a health probe that is checking regularly at port 80. Now, what I will do is that instead of giving you this IP address or this IP address, I'll just go ahead and give you the IP address of the load balancer or the fully qualified domain name that is attached to this particular IP address out here. Paste this here. Just say enter. You have the IIS page. So load balancer is giving you the IIS page. Now, in order to understand whether it's VM1 or VM2, I'll just put a forward slash and say default.html. Demo VM1 from each to out here. Now, if I refresh this out, in all likely, I will get the same page because I have something called as a session persistence, or my browser has cached that particular IP out here. In case this machine is to go down, so if I go ahead and say stop this machine out, which is demo VM1, so I'll stop this machine out here as such. In case this machine were to go down, so it's now telling it is stopping. As and when this is stopping, your backend pool will automatically respond that this machine is being updated, it's being deallocated out here. So it's saying the machine is getting deallocated. So once you refresh the screen, you'll no longer get that traffic from that particular machine. As a front-end user, you won't even see the difference. It's the same application out here. But for but for me, as in let's say as an organization, my applications are highly available. Meaning now it's telling, okay, fine, you know what? If this machine is not available, I'll now start diverting you to a different machine out here because this machine is kicked out of the pool. It's saying, okay, fine, you know what? This machine is not any longer responding. So until and unless this machine doesn't respond, I won't go ahead and divert the traffic back again. So this is how the load balancer is going to work. Again, I'll check why the basic load balancer wasn't working. I'll just update on that. But any questions still here?
Yeah. The first one is session persistence is enabled by default, or did we enable it?
No, session persistence is by default enabled. So if you go into your load balancers, right? So if you just check the inbound rules, of your load balancer.
So if you don't want, we need to uncheck that, is it?
Yes, if you don't want, you can uncheck that out. So let's see load balancing rules. If you look at the rule out here, now the session persistence is none. Idle timeout is something like this. It's a client IP. Right now it is none out here, which means
Yeah,
that it's not persisting your session. That's the
correct.
reason I'm able to see it from a different, let's say, virtual machine out here. But you can go ahead enable, let's say, telling it's a client IP, or based upon a protocol, you can give us a session persistence out here as such.
No, I mean, my question is, if it is none, it has to
Hmm.
load round robin load balance between the two virtual machines, right?
It's already round robbing it. It's already round robbing it. But the point here is that when you load it for the first time, my browser is caching this out. My browser is caching the entire, let's say, page out there. That's the reason when I'm just reloading, my browser is not even going to, let's say, that particular server. It's just going into the cache and, let's say, loading the page out there as such.
But how do we eliminate that actually? Let's say user is, let's say external
Hmm.
user who is trying to connect to our web application, right?
Okay.
To the load balancer. So
Okay.
his browser or her browser should not cache it, right? So it should do the
Hmm.
round.
See, though you do not have the session persistence enabled out here, your
Hmm.
browser will have a short-term cache. Your browser will have a very short-term
Yeah, yeah,
cache out here.
that will time out, right? After some time. There
That
is a
will time
feature
out,
time
but that
out.
will time out in, let's say, about 30 seconds or something. And
Right.
since it's timing out,
Mhm.
I have a demo VM 00 coming up. I'm not having the demo VM 01 coming up out here as such.
Because you have shut down that one, right?
I shut down that
Shut down.
exactly.
Now,
So
if you
now it's
bring it
hitting the
up,
load.
yeah,
Mhm.
if you bring it up on if the session expires or timeouts, then it should switch
Yes,
between these two VMs, right? Ideally.
yes, it should switch between ideally these two VMs out here as such.
Oh, so what other algorithms load balancer supports except apart from the round robin? It's only round robin,
Load
or
balancer only has one thing, round robin. That's it. Load balancer is a
uh,
very simple layer 4 device which only understands HTTP protocol, and it will only do one round robin out here. That's it. So if people are not understanding what round robin is, very simple. Round robin is an alternative mechanism, which means if two users are there, the request from first user is going to go into first machine. Request from second user is going to go into second machine. Third user first machine, fourth user second machine, and so on and so forth. This is called as a round robin strategy. And load
but this
balancers
is
only support round robin. Hmm?
layer 4, you said. I mean, it works on TCP or
Yes,
UDP, right? I mean, it is not
yes, it's
for the
a transport layer.
HTTP.
Yes,
Yeah,
HTTP is layer 7 again, so this is
yeah,
transport
correct.
layer out
This
here.
is TCP or UDP, basically.
Yes, so load
Network load
balancer
balancing.
only works on layer 4 out here. It doesn't really understand your HTTP or HTTPS traffic. So
Do we
load
have
balancers are
application
hmm,
load balancer also, which runs on HTTP?
that's called as an application gateway. So if you go into
Okay.
load balancers out here, you have flavors of load balancers. If you say load balancers, you have load balancing services called application gateway, your friend or load balancer and traffic manager out here as such. So depending upon this scenario, you can use one of these, let's say, mechanisms out here in order to divert your traffic.
So
Yeah,
we are going
Kiran,
to see
I'm
traffic
having
manager and other things, right? Later on, CDN, traffic manager,
Yes,
gateway.
yes.
yeah, Kiran, I'm having one query.
Good, please.
Yeah, regarding that,
Just a second.
sometimes some payments.
Just a second. I'm sorry. I need to just switch my speakers. As somehow I'm not able to hear your voice properly. Yes, go ahead, please, Anil.
Yeah, in load balancer, can you increase the time of session time?
When you say session time, do you mean the health probe time, or do you mean the session timeout?
Session time. Yeah,
When
automatically
you say
session is
session
time out,
timeout,
no?
exactly.
Yes, yes.
No, the session will not
Session time
automatically. No,
means,
the thing is that, see, the session time is just telling you that, okay, fine, let's go there. In the load balancer inbound rules, it's called idle timeout. So it's just telling that, okay, fine, keep this connection alive. You can increase this particular time. Yes, you can increase this particular idle time to, let's say, about 30 minutes and so on and so forth. But you don't ideally need to do that. But if you want to change your health probe time, even that is possible. I mean, you can go ahead and say, if your health probe, let's say, is checking for 5 seconds, you can increase this out. So it starts from, let's say, 5 seconds out here as such.
So,
Okay.
Kiran, the load balancer is on subscription level, not on storage.
The load balancer is on a subscription level. Not really. See, the load balancer is a part of the subscription, yes. But the load balancer all is concerned about what is the backend pool. So whatever you add in the pool, and to add in the pool, the machines have to be in the same regions, of course, in the same region, of course. So in order to add in this particular pool, the load balancer just tells, okay, fine, you know what? I'll take this particular machines, I'll divert the traffic. That's it. So no matter where your machines are running, it doesn't really, this doesn't really have, let's say, a concern.
It should be same region.
It should be same region. Yes, it has to be same
How
region.
it will work for global public IPs?
Which we will talk about global. We'll talk about that in a global load balancing strategy on what is a global, and then we'll see what is a global, let's say, level out here as such.
It's a platform as a service, right? Load balancer, I think.
Load balancer is an infrastructure as a service, not a platform as a service. It's a pure infrastructure as a service out here, which I'll also tell why it's an infrastructure as a service and not a platform as a service.
So that there are many load balancer techniques or applications available in Azure Flow, not
Mhm.
only one.
Yeah, not only
Many
one. They are, yes, there are many load balancing options that are available in Azure, like app gateway, application gateway. You have traffic managers, you have a front door, and so on and so forth.
whichever is feasible that can be used. Only one can be used in the real-time scenarios, product level.
See, it depends upon what kind of a traffic that you're managing.
Correct.
If you have something like a HTTP redirect, if you have something like, if you're only handling, let's say, a simple TCP traffic, then load balancer is good enough. But but let's say, you come and you say that, okay, fine, you know what, I have a workload that is running in AWS. So I have a server in AWS, I have a server in GCP, I have an on-premise server, I also have an Azure server. So I want to mix and match things out. You can go for something like a traffic manager, which is a global load balancing mechanism. If you have a HTTPS traffic that you're looking to, let's say, divert, which is only in Azure, then you can go for something like an application gateway. So depending upon the use case scenario and depending upon what you're trying to achieve, we have multiple options that are available out there in the Azure portal out here as such. Yes, any final questions that I can take, guys? I am just a little over the time, so I'll just take one more question and we can close the session.
So, Kiran, last question. So you selected IPv4 and IPv6. What we
Mhm.
understand, IPv4 is something on a 3G or 4G, IPv6 or 5G something, right? If it works on both mobile application and
Not
IPv,
really. Not completely true. See, IPv6 has generally a greater capability in order to carry your bits of information. In an IPv4, you are able to do 32-bit. In an IPv6, I think it's a 256 or 128. I'm not too sure about the number. You have a greater bit of information and a greater room to, let's say, carry your information, which means that using one particular IP address I can create, I can go ahead and, let's say, accommodate multiple resources in the same thing out here as such. And also,
120. It's 128.
IPv4s are
I
128,
think
right? Okay, it's 128. So
it's
I
an
wasn't sure of the number,
hexadecimal
but
format
yes,
actually. So it is,
it's a hexadecimal format. That's true. It's an alphanumeric hexadecimal format out here,
but not all application
which means
supports.
that,
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
yes, very importantly, yes, not all the applications do support IPv6 out here. Not everything in Azure does support IPv6 as out here as such. Okay, so I'll have to close the session right now. I'll take more questions tomorrow before we begin, and then we'll move into the global load balancing solution tomorrow, and we'll understand what a global load balancer is really, and let's look at our entire architecture in a very high level out here. Until then, thank you and have a good day, guys. Thank you.